The early morning sun crept through the windows of the modest home in General Santos City, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Eduardo Santos had been awake for hours already, preparing for his first day as a household helper for a family he had only heard about in hushed, reverent tones throughout his neighborhood. At 23, Eduardo had already experienced more hardship than most. Raised in the slums of Tonda, Manila, he had migrated south seeking opportunity after his parents passed away, leaving him alone to care for his two younger siblings. With only a sixth-grade education and calloused hands as his resume, Eduardo had been grateful when his cousin mentioned that a rising boxing star needed household staff. His cousin had whispered about this boxer potentially becoming someone important someday. A fighter winning bouts in Manila, who had just built a house in Genson and needed reliable help. Eduardo straightened his only clean shirt and tucked it into his pants. His siblings were still asleep on their thin mats, peaceful in the quiet morning. He would send money home to them as soon as he could. This job was everything: their education, their food, their future. When Eduardo arrived at the address, he was surprised by the modesty of the home. It was nice, certainly better than anywhere he had ever lived, but far from the mansion he had imagined. A young man opened the door, muscular but shorter than Eduardo had expected. He had a friendly face with a slight gap between his front teeth. It was Manny Pacquiao himself. Their introduction was brief but warm. Despite their similar ages, the differences in their trajectories were already apparent. Yet there was something in Manny's eyes, a familiar hunger that Eduardo recognized from the faces in his own neighborhood. The hunger of someone who knew what it meant to have nothing. Eduardo expressed his gratitude for the opportunity with respectful formality. Manny insisted on being called by his first name, noting that they weren't so different. He too had come from nothing. As Manny showed Eduardo around the house and explained his duties, cleaning, cooking, occasional errands, Eduardo couldn't help but notice the sparse furnishings, the simple lifestyle. There were no luxuries, just necessities and a few boxing posters on the walls. In the corner of what served as a living room was a small altar with a Bible prominently displayed. Manny expressed his need for someone trustworthy, someone who understood value. He mentioned an upcoming fight in Manila, suggesting that a victory could improve circumstances for everyone involved. Eduardo nodded, understanding perfectly what Manny meant. He had heard stories of the boxer's humble origins, how he had left home as a teenager, stowed away on a ship to Manila, and lived on the streets before finding boxing. Unlike some who had found success, Pacquiao seemed to carry his past with him, not as a burden but as a compass. That evening, after finishing his chores, Eduardo sat at the small kitchen table writing a letter to his siblings. He told them about his new employer, how he seemed kind and hard-working. He enclosed most of the small advance Manny had given him, keeping only enough for transportation and basic necessities. In his letter, Eduardo expressed hope that he had found a good place where he could build something meaningful. As he sealed the envelope, Eduardo heard the rhythmic sound of a jump rope from the backyard. He peered through the window and saw Manny, alone in the fading light, training with an intensity that made Eduardo catch his breath. There was something almost spiritual in the boxer's focus, a determination that transcended the physical act. In that moment, watching the future champion push himself in solitude, Eduardo made a silent promise to serve this man with the same dedication he witnessed. Not because Manny was becoming famous, but because he recognized in him a kindred spirit, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the value of hard work. Little did Eduardo know that this day would mark the beginning of a 15-year journey alongside one of boxing's greatest legends, a journey that would transform both their lives in ways neither could imagine. 3 years passed quickly. Eduardo had settled into his role in Manny's household, his duties expanding as Pacquiao's success in the ring grew. What began as basic housekeeping had evolved into a position of trust and responsibility. Eduardo now managed the household schedule, coordinated with visitors, and ensured that Manny could focus entirely on his training and fights. The modest house had been replaced by a larger one, though still humble compared to what Manny could afford. More staff had been hired, but Eduardo remained the most trusted, the one who had been there from the early days. On a warm evening in 2001, Eduardo sat in the kitchen with Manny's mother, Dionysia, whom everyone affectionately called Mommy D, watching the television with nervous anticipation. Manny was facing South African Lelahonolo Ledwaba for the IBF Super Bantamweight title in Las Vegas. It was Manny's American debut, a fight he had taken on short notice. Mommy D expressed concern about Manny being so far from home, so distant from the Philippines. Eduardo responded with quiet confidence, expressing his belief that Manny would find a way to win, as he always did. When Manny dominated the fight and won by technical knockout in the 6th round, the kitchen erupted in cheers. Eduardo found himself embracing Mommy D, both of them jumping with joy as though they were in the ring themselves. That night, as Eduardo cleaned up after the small celebration, his cell phone rang. It was Manny calling from Las Vegas, breathless with excitement about his victory. Eduardo congratulated him enthusiastically, expressing pride in how Manny had shown the world what Filipinos were made of. Manny responded with heartfelt gratitude, acknowledging that he couldn't have succeeded without knowing everything was being taken care of at home. He referred to Eduardo as family, words that warmed Eduardo more than any raise could have. In the years he had worked for Manny, Eduardo had sent enough money home for his brother to finish school and for his sister to start a small business. His own life had improved immeasurably, but it was this sense of belonging, of purpose, that meant the most. As Manny's fame grew exponentially, Eduardo witnessed the transformation not just of the boxer's career but of his impact on the Philippines. After defeating Marco Antonio Barrera in 2003, Manny became a national hero. Streets emptied during his fights as the entire nation gathered around televisions. Crime rates dropped to zero. For a few hours, a divided country found unity in the achievements of their champion. Through it all, Eduardo remained a constant presence, adapting to each new challenge. When politicians and celebrities began appearing at Manny's doorstep, Eduardo learned to navigate these social waters. When Manny was awarded the Presidential Medal of Merit by President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, it was Eduardo who prepared his barong Tagalog and made sure everything was perfect. Their morning routines reflected their deep familiarity, with Eduardo anticipating Manny's needs before they were expressed. He would prepare Manny's favorite breakfast, beef topper with garlic rice and egg, before it was even requested. Manny would joke about Eduardo knowing him better than he knew himself, to which Eduardo would respond that 15 years of service had that effect. Indeed, it had been 12 years since that first day, and the journey had been remarkable. Eduardo had watched Manny win title after title, moving up through weight classes in a way no boxer had done before. He had seen him become not just a sports icon but a congressman, using his platform to help others who came from circumstances like their own. Through marriages, children, victories, and occasional defeats, Eduardo had remained the steady hand ensuring that the household ran seamlessly. He had grown from a young man desperate for work into a respected household manager whose opinion Manny valued and sought. One evening, Manny summoned Eduardo to his home office where he was reviewing bills and financial statements. The atmosphere was serious as Manny acknowledged their 12-year history together, noting that Eduardo had seen both the best and worst of him. Manny then revealed his intention to run for the Senate the following year, explaining that this would mean increased responsibility and public scrutiny. He needed someone he could trust completely to help manage his affairs, and asked if Eduardo would be willing to take on more responsibilities, with appropriate compensation adjustments. Eduardo accepted without hesitation, expressing his continued loyalty. Manny suggested that after all these years, Eduardo had earned the right to address him by his first name rather than the formal sir he still used. Eduardo declined politely, explaining that the formality helped him remember his responsibilities. As he left the office, Eduardo reflected on how far they had both come from that first meeting. Manny from a hungry young boxer to a global icon, and himself from a desperate job seeker to a trusted confidant. Their lives had risen together, intertwined in ways neither could have predicted. Little did Eduardo know that the greatest test of their relationship, and the most profound demonstration of Manny's character, was still to come. The world saw Manny Pacquiao as the people's champ, the 8-division world champion who brought pride to the Philippines with every victory. They saw his lightning-fast hands, his explosive power, his boundless energy in the ring. What they didn't see was Eduardo, working tirelessly behind the scenes, making countless invisible sacrifices to support the champion's journey. By 2010, Eduardo's role had expanded far beyond traditional household management. He had become Manny's personal assistant, confidant, and occasional advisor. His days began before dawn and often ended well after midnight, especially during training camps or congressional sessions when Manny's schedule became particularly demanding. On a rainy November morning, Eduardo received a call from his sister in Manila. Their brother, Ricardo, had been diagnosed with kidney failure and needed immediate medical attention. The treatment would be expensive, far more than his sister's small business could cover. She apologized for having to ask for help, addressing him as Kuya, elder brother, with deep respect. Eduardo promised to send money, though he knew it would deplete his savings. He had been planning to buy a small plot of land in his hometown, a dream he had nurtured for years, but family came first. Always. That same day, Manny was preparing for an important congressional hearing. Eduardo set aside his personal concerns and focused on ensuring everything was perfect. Manny's barong Tagalog was impeccably pressed. His briefcase contained all necessary documents. His transportation was arranged with precision. As Manny was about to leave, he noticed something in Eduardo's demeanor and inquired about his well-being. Eduardo hesitated, considering it unprofessional to bring personal problems to work. He downplayed the situation as a minor family matter that needed addressing. Manny studied him momentarily, reminding Eduardo that he could approach him if he needed anything. Eduardo acknowledged this with professional composure, maintaining his reserved demeanor. That evening, after sending most of his savings to Manila, Eduardo sat alone in his small room at the back of Manny's property. He allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability, worried about his brother and the uncertain future. His dream of land ownership would have to wait, perhaps indefinitely. A knock at his door startled him. It was unusual for anyone to come to his quarters this late. Opening the door revealed Manny, still in his congressional attire but with his tie loosened. He requested entry, an unusual reversal of their normal interactions. Eduardo hastily tidied the simple space and invited him in. Manny revealed that he had spoken with Maria in the kitchen and learned about Eduardo's brother's condition. Eduardo felt embarrassed, having only mentioned his situation briefly to Maria, not expecting it to reach Manny. Eduardo tried to downplay the matter, not wanting to burden his employer with personal problems. Manny responded firmly, emphasizing that after 15 years of service, Eduardo's troubles were not a burden to him. He produced an envelope containing funds sufficient to cover Ricardo's medical expenses and more, insisting it was not a loan but what Eduardo deserved. Eduardo stared at the envelope, speechless. He began to refuse, but Manny interrupted, highlighting the many sacrifices Eduardo had made over the years: missed family gatherings, lost sleep, constant availability. Manny acknowledged noticing these sacrifices, seeing how Eduardo arrived before everyone else and left after everyone was gone, how he solved problems before they reached Manny. He emphasized that this was not charity but recognition of Eduardo's dedication. After Manny left, Eduardo opened the envelope with trembling hands. The amount inside was far more than expected, enough to cover his brother's treatment with plenty remaining. He felt a complex mixture of gratitude, relief, and something else, a sense that despite their different positions, Manny truly saw him as a human being with his own needs and dreams. The next morning, Eduardo performed his duties with renewed dedication. Neither man mentioned the envelope or their conversation. It was as though a silent understanding had passed between them, deepening a bond forged through years of shared struggles and triumphs. What Eduardo didn't know was that Manny had done more than just provide financial assistance. He had quietly arranged for Ricardo to be transferred to one of Manila's best hospitals, using his influence to ensure he received the highest quality care. He had done this not for recognition or gratitude, but because he understood something fundamental about the nature of success. No one achieves greatness alone. In the years that followed, this pattern would repeat itself in different ways. When Eduardo's sister needed capital to expand her business, funds mysteriously appeared. When his hometown was hit by a typhoon, Manny's foundation was the first to provide relief, with special attention to the areas where Eduardo's extended family lived. These were not the actions that made headlines or increased Manny's fame. They were the quiet demonstrations of character that only those closest to him witnessed. For Eduardo, they reinforced what he had sensed on that very first day, that beyond the titles and the wealth and the acclaim, Manny Pacquiao remained a man who remembered what it meant to have nothing, and who valued loyalty above all else. As Eduardo's brother recovered and his family's situation stabilized, he found himself reflecting on the nature of sacrifice. His own sacrifices had been made willingly, out of duty and gratitude, but Manny's sacrifice, giving without expectation of return, helping without seeking recognition, revealed a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be the people's champ. It was a lesson Eduardo would carry with him, especially as darker days approached that would test the strength of their bond in ways neither man could anticipate. 2012 brought unexpected challenges to Manny Pacquiao's seemingly unstoppable career. On June 9th, he faced Timothy Bradley in a fight that shocked the boxing world when the judges awarded Bradley a controversial split decision victory, ending Pacquiao's 7-year winning streak. While most boxing analysts believed Manny had clearly won the fight, the official decision stood. For the first time in many years, a cloud of defeat hung over Manny's camp. Eduardo watched with concern as his employer processed this unexpected setback. Though Manny maintained a stoic public face, Eduardo witnessed the private moments of frustration and self-doubt. One evening, Manny reflected that perhaps this was a divine test of faith. Eduardo responded respectfully, acknowledging Manny's increasing religious devotion while offering that every champion faces defeats, and what matters is the response to adversity. Manny noted with wry amusement that after 15 years, Eduardo had become something of a philosopher. Before Manny could properly rebound from the controversial loss, he agreed to a fourth fight with his great rival, Juan Manuel Marquez, scheduled for December 8th. Eduardo had concerns about the quick return to the ring but kept them to himself, focusing instead on ensuring that Manny's training camp ran smoothly. The night of the Marquez fight, Eduardo watched the broadcast with the household staff in Manny's General Santos City home. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Through 5 previous fights, Manny had never been knocked out, and despite the Bradley setback, everyone expected a victory. When Marquez's right hand connected with Manny's face in the closing seconds of the 6th round, sending him face first to the canvas, the room fell completely silent. Eduardo felt as though the air had been sucked out of his lungs. On screen, Manny lay motionless for a frightening length of time. Maria whispered Dios KO, "My God," in the deathly quiet room. In the days that followed, Eduardo managed a household in crisis. Reporters camped outside the gates. Phone calls poured in from concerned friends, political allies, and opportunistic strangers. Through it all, Eduardo maintained a protective barrier around Manny, filtering visitors and calls, ensuring his employer had space to recover both physically and emotionally. When Manny finally returned to General Santos City, Eduardo was shocked by his appearance. Beyond the visible bruising, there was something diminished in his demeanor, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. During this period, Eduardo's own life hit an unexpected crisis. His brother Ricardo's condition had deteriorated despite the treatments, and doctors were now recommending a kidney transplant as the only lasting solution. The cost would be substantial, even with the help Manny had previously provided. At the same time, Eduardo's mother had fallen ill in their hometown. At 68, she was facing her own health challenges, and his sister was struggling to care for both her and Ricardo while maintaining her small business. For the first time in 15 years, Eduardo found himself torn between his duty to Manny and his responsibility to his family. The timing couldn't have been worse. Manny needed him now more than ever, yet his family's situation was becoming desperate. One evening, as Eduardo served Manny his dinner, he finally found the courage to request a leave of absence, explaining his brother's worsening condition and his mother's illness. He estimated needing 2 weeks, possibly more. Manny's response was immediate and understanding. He granted the leave without hesitation, insisting that family must come first. Eduardo explained his arrangements for Maria and Carlos to manage Manny's schedule during his absence, but Manny dismissed these concerns, focusing instead on Eduardo's family needs. He inquired if there was any additional assistance Eduardo required, which Eduardo declined despite his financial strain. That night, as Eduardo packed for his journey to Manila, he received a text message from Manny's personal assistant. Arrangements had been made for him at the best hospital in Manila. A specialist in kidney transplantation would see his brother the following day. All expenses would be covered. Additionally, a nurse had been hired to care for his mother, allowing his sister to focus on her business. Eduardo sat on his bed, overwhelmed by this unexpected generosity. In the midst of Manny's own professional crisis, facing questions about his career and future, he had still found the capacity to extend help to Eduardo's family. The 2 weeks stretched into a month as Eduardo coordinated his brother's treatment and his mother's care. Throughout this time, he received daily updates about Manny's activities from Maria and Carlos. The boxer was slowly emerging from his post-defeat cocoon, beginning to consider his next steps. When Eduardo finally returned to General Santos City, he found a transformed Manny. There was a new sense of purpose about him, a clarity that had been missing before. Manny greeted him warmly, inquiring about his family. Eduardo expressed gratitude for Manny's generosity, reporting that his brother was recovering well from the transplant and his mother's condition had stabilized. Manny expressed satisfaction at this news, emphasizing the paramount importance of family. He then shared his period of reflection and prayer during Eduardo's absence, revealing his decision to continue boxing but with a changed perspective. Manny outlined his plans: a comeback fight against Brandon Rios in Macau, increased focus on his congressional duties, and a renewed commitment to his faith. He explained his realization that his platform had been divinely given for a purpose, and that his defeats, while humbling, were necessary reminders of what truly matters. As Eduardo resumed his duties, he noticed subtle changes in the household. Manny spent more time with his family and in Bible study. He was more deliberate in his charitable giving, focusing on sustainable projects rather than handouts. And most surprisingly, he began taking a more personal interest in the lives of his staff, including Eduardo. During a drive to a congressional meeting, Manny acknowledged Eduardo's steadfast presence through everything, the heights of success and the valleys of defeat. He expressed regret at not having shown sufficient appreciation. Eduardo, uncomfortable with this directness, demurred, describing his service to the Pacquiao family as a privilege. Manny rejected this characterization, defining their relationship as one of loyalty and friendship, even if never explicitly named as such. He reflected that recent months had taught him not to take such connections for granted. In that moment, Eduardo understood that they had both been transformed by their respective trials. Manny's defeats in the ring had stripped away some of the insulation that success had built around him, allowing him to see more clearly the people who truly stood by him. Eduardo's family crisis had revealed the depth of Manny's character, his willingness to help precisely when it was most needed. What neither man yet realized was that these difficult times were preparing them for an even more significant chapter in their shared journey, one that would permanently transform both their lives and redefine the meaning of true generosity. By 2015, Manny Pacquiao had successfully rebuilt his career, winning 3 consecutive fights after the devastating Marquez knockout. At 36, he was no longer the whirlwind force of his prime, but his experience and refined technique had made him a more complete boxer. The entire Philippines watched with bated breath as he prepared for what was billed as the fight of the century against the undefeated Floyd Mayweather Jr. Eduardo had been busier than ever during this period. Besides managing Manny's household, he now coordinated with the boxing team, congressional staff, and business managers. He had become indispensable, the constant in Manny's increasingly complex life. On May 2, 2015, the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight finally took place after years of negotiations. Despite Manny's best efforts, he lost by unanimous decision, a defeat made more bitter by the revelation afterward that he had fought with a shoulder injury. The Filipino nation mourned collectively, and Eduardo witnessed firsthand the toll it took on Manny. Yet something unexpected emerged from this disappointment. The fight had generated an unprecedented payday. Reports estimated Manny's earnings at over $100 million for the single bout. While the public saw only the wealth, Eduardo observed how thoughtfully Manny approached this windfall. One evening while reviewing his financial portfolio, Manny reflected on the extraordinary blessing of his circumstances. How he had risen from sleeping on cardboard boxes and experiencing hunger to possessing more wealth than he needed for multiple lifetimes. This led to a more philosophical consideration of his legacy, not just as an athlete or politician, but as a human being. He questioned what people would remember about him, his titles, his wealth, or the difference he had made in others' lives. Eduardo suggested people would remember Manny's generosity, but Manny disagreed, asserting that giving money was easy when one had it in abundance. True generosity, he explained, was about recognizing potential in others and helping them achieve it. In the months that followed, Eduardo noticed Manny taking a more strategic approach to his philanthropy. Rather than simply responding to requests, he began seeking out opportunities to create lasting change, funding hospitals, schools, and housing projects in the poorest regions of the Philippines. More surprisingly, Manny began taking a deeper interest in the aspirations of those closest to him, including his staff. He helped Maria's son secure a scholarship to study nursing. He invested in Carlos's brother's small business. Each intervention was thoughtful, aimed at creating independence rather than dependence. During a rainy drive to a Senate committee meeting, Manny asked Eduardo an unexpected personal question: what dreams he had set aside during his years of service, what he would do if not working for the Pacquiao family. The question caught Eduardo off guard. After thoughtful consideration, he admitted to a long-held desire for land in his hometown near the coast, where he could build a gathering place for his family and perhaps start a business in his later years. Manny acknowledged this with quiet interest, but did not pursue the topic further. A month later, Manny announced his retirement from boxing following a victory over Timothy Bradley in their rubber match. At 37, with a distinguished career spanning over 20 years, he would focus on his senatorial duties and family. The household staff held a small celebration, though there was an undercurrent of uncertainty about what this new chapter would mean for all of them. Eduardo found himself wondering if his services would still be needed to the same extent. Manny's schedule would certainly change without the demands of training camps and fights. The possibility of scaling back his role, or even ending it, filled Eduardo with a strange melancholy. For 15 years, his identity had been inextricably linked to his service to the Pacquiao family. These concerns were temporarily set aside when Manny invited Eduardo to accompany him on a trip to General Santos City. Manny explained that he needed to inspect some property investments and wanted Eduardo's opinion, an unusual request that nevertheless filled Eduardo with pride. The car journey from the airport took them along a coastal road that Eduardo recognized from his childhood. The blue expanse of the Sarangani Bay glittered in the distance, framed by gently rolling hills. Manny commented on the beauty of the area, which Eduardo acknowledged had always been special to him. As they turned off the main road onto a smaller path, Eduardo's curiosity grew. This wasn't the direction of any of Manny's known properties. The car finally stopped at a gate fronting a modestly sized but well-situated coastal plot. A simple sign hung on the gate, Santos Property. Eduardo looked at Manny in confusion. Manny encouraged him to open the gate. With uncertain steps, Eduardo approached and pushed it open. Beyond lay an expanse of cleared land with foundations already laid for a structure. A breathtaking view of the bay stretched out before them. Manny asked for Eduardo's opinion on the property's proximity to the water, mentioning the surveyor's assurance that the elevation protected against storm surges. Eduardo remained confused. Manny then reached into his pocket and produced a folded document, presenting it to Eduardo as a 15th anniversary gift. With trembling hands, Eduardo unfolded the papers, a land title with his name clearly printed as the owner. Eduardo stood speechless, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the gesture. Manny explained that the foundation was already started, an architect hired, though any aspect could be changed according to Eduardo's preferences. He mentioned a fund established for construction and initial operating costs should Eduardo wish to start the business he had mentioned. Eduardo finally found his voice, thick with emotion, expressing that he couldn't accept such an extravagant gift. Manny firmly placed a hand on his shoulder, insisting this wasn't charity but an investment in someone he believed in. He joked about expecting preferential treatment when visiting the resort once completed. This light remark broke the tension, enabling Eduardo to laugh through his tears and begin to grasp the full significance of the gift, not just the material value but the recognition and belief it represented. As they walked the property together, with Manny explaining the architectural plans and Eduardo still processing his disbelief, a profound shift occurred in their relationship. The employer-employee dynamic that had defined them for 15 years began to dissolve, replaced by something closer to friendship, to brotherhood. That evening, as they shared a meal in General Santos City, Eduardo finally dropped the formality that had been his shield for so long, addressing Manny by his first name without the customary "sir" for the first time. Manny smiled, recognizing the significance of this small change, and acknowledged that Eduardo had earned this familiarity, had earned everything he received. What neither man fully realized in that moment was that this turning point marked not just a new chapter in their individual lives, but the beginning of a partnership that would touch countless others in the years to come. The year following Manny's retirement from boxing brought dramatic changes to both men's lives. Eduardo, after 15 years of serving the Pacquiao household, now split his time between his continuing duties and overseeing the development of what was gradually becoming Santos Beach Resort, on the property Manny had gifted him. The transition wasn't without challenges. Eduardo, accustomed to executing others' visions, initially struggled with making decisions about his own project. What kind of resort should it be? How many rooms? What amenities? These questions often left him paralyzed with uncertainty. Sensing his hesitation, Manny arranged for Eduardo to meet with successful resort owners throughout the Philippines. These mentors generously shared their experiences, both successes and failures, providing Eduardo with practical knowledge he couldn't have gained otherwise. Manny advised him to learn from everyone, but ultimately build something reflecting his own vision. Gradually, Eduardo's confidence grew. He decided to create not a luxury destination, but a mid-range family resort that local Filipinos could afford to enjoy. He wanted to employ people from his hometown, creating opportunities just as Manny had done for him years ago. During this period, Manny immersed himself in his senatorial duties, earning respect for his attention to legislation benefiting the country's poorest citizens. Though his formal education was limited, his life experience gave him a perspective few other senators possessed. He understood poverty not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. One evening, while reviewing resort plans in Manny's home office, their conversation turned to broader matters. Manny reflected on his evolving understanding of success, from his youthful perception of it as financial abundance, to achievement of titles and fame, to his current recognition that true success lay in positive impact, in how many lives one could touch and opportunities one could create. Eduardo related this philosophy to his own project, noting that the resort was already employing 20 people from his hometown before even opening. Families previously without resources now had steady income. Manny affirmed this as genuine success, creating ripples extending beyond oneself. This philosophy became evident in both men's approaches to their respective projects. Manny leveraged his position to create legislative frameworks supporting small businesses and educational opportunities. Eduardo designed his resort to maximize local employment and showcase Filipino craftsmanship and hospitality. The construction phase brought its share of setbacks. A typhoon damaged the partially built structures, requiring costly repairs. Corruption among local officials created permit delays. There were moments when Eduardo considered giving up, overwhelmed by the complexities of business ownership. During one particularly difficult period, when funding was running short and regulatory obstacles seemed insurmountable, Eduardo visited Manny's office in Manila to confess his doubts. He suggested perhaps he wasn't suited for entrepreneurship and should sell the land for safer investments. Manny responded by retrieving a worn, faded photograph from his desk drawer. It showed a skinny teenage boy sleeping on cardboard boxes in what appeared to be a public gym. He identified this as himself at 16, newly arrived in Manila with nothing but dreams and hunger. He explained that he kept this photo as a reminder of the boy who repeatedly wanted to surrender but persevered. The question, Manny suggested, wasn't whether Eduardo was capable, but whether his desire was sufficient to overcome inevitable obstacles. This simple wisdom resonated deeply with Eduardo. He returned to Sarangani with renewed determination, finding creative solutions to challenges that had seemed insurmountable days earlier. By early 2017, Santos Beach Resort was nearing completion. The empty plot had transformed into 15 tastefully designed cottages, a central gathering area with a restaurant showcasing local cuisine, and carefully landscaped grounds preserving the natural beauty of the coastline. Eduardo had assembled a staff of 35, all from nearby communities, many of whom had never held formal employment before. He took personal interest in their training, instilling the same standards of excellence he had maintained in Manny's household, emphasizing that they weren't merely serving guests but showcasing the best of Filipino culture and hospitality. On a warm April evening, as the sun set over Sarangani Bay, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Eduardo stood on the beach surveying what he had built. The realization that this was real, that this land and business were truly his, still struck him with moments of disbelief. He received a message from Manny regarding the grand opening scheduled for the following day. Despite Eduardo's protests, Manny had insisted on attending, even rearranging his Senate schedule to be present. His attendance would undoubtedly attract media attention, bringing invaluable publicity to the fledgling business. Eduardo expressed profound gratitude for making everything possible. Manny's response was characteristically modest, that Eduardo had built it himself, Manny had merely provided the land. As he walked back toward the main building, Eduardo reflected on the truth of those words. Yes, Manny had given him an extraordinary opportunity, but Eduardo had transformed that gift through his own vision and perseverance. The resort represented not just Manny's belief in him, but his belief in himself. The grand opening exceeded all expectations. Manny's presence indeed attracted media coverage, but he skillfully redirected attention to Eduardo and the resort itself. Standing together for photographs, the visual contrast between them was striking. Manny in his tailored suit, Eduardo in his resort manager's attire, yet there was an undeniable equality in their bearing, a mutual respect visible to all. In his comments to reporters, Manny emphasized that the Philippines needed not handouts but opportunities, not just jobs but ownership. He cited Eduardo as exemplifying the possibilities that emerge when talent meets opportunity. In the months that followed, Santos Beach Resort thrived. Its combination of affordability, authentic Filipino hospitality, and stunning natural setting attracted a steady stream of guests. Eduardo implemented a profit-sharing program for his staff, ensuring that the resort's success was their success too. Meanwhile, Manny continued his Senate work, but he found time to visit the resort occasionally, always insisting on being treated like any other guest despite Eduardo's protestations. During these visits, the two men often sat late into the evening on the beach, reflecting on their parallel journeys from poverty to prosperity. During one such conversation, Eduardo expressed wonder at their current circumstances, so far removed from their humble beginnings. Manny acknowledged the extraordinary distance from his days sleeping on cardboard boxes, when 3 daily meals seemed an unattainable luxury. After a comfortable silence watching moonlight on the water, Manny observed that while people considered him generous for what he'd done for Eduardo, seeing Eduardo succeed brought him greater satisfaction than any boxing title. Eduardo understood then something profound about generosity. True giving created a circle of joy that enriched both the giver and receiver. What Manny had done for him wasn't just an act of charity. It was an investment in human potential that had yielded returns neither of them could have fully anticipated. As the resort flourished, Eduardo began his own modest philanthropic efforts, providing scholarships for local children and supporting coastal conservation initiatives. The ripples were extending outward, just as Manny had described, touching lives far beyond their immediate circle. Yet even as both men celebrated these achievements, neither could have predicted the remarkable transformation their relationship would undergo in the final chapter of their 15-year journey together. By 2019, both Manny and Eduardo had settled into their respective roles with a confidence born of experience. Manny had established himself as a serious legislator, surprising critics who had dismissed him as merely a celebrity senator. His bills addressing poverty and educational access had earned bipartisan support, and there were whispers of presidential ambitions on the horizon. Eduardo, meanwhile, had transformed Santos Beach Resort into a thriving enterprise employing over 50 people. Its reputation for authentic Filipino hospitality had spread beyond domestic tourists, attracting international visitors seeking experiences off the beaten path. He had even been invited to speak at tourism industry conferences, sharing his journey from household employee to successful business owner. While their professional lives had diverged, the bond between them remained strong. They communicated regularly, with Manny often seeking Eduardo's grounded perspective on political matters, and Eduardo still valuing Manny's business insights. In June of that year, as Eduardo prepared for the resort's annual staff appreciation event, he received an unexpected call from Jean Key, Manny's wife. She expressed concern about Manny's health, explaining that doctors had warned about his elevated blood pressure and need for rest, but his characteristic stubbornness prevented him from heeding medical advice. She asked for Eduardo's help, noting Manny's deep respect for him, and suggested that an invitation to the resort might persuade Manny to take a necessary break. Eduardo immediately agreed to help, promising to contact Manny that day. To his surprise, Manny accepted the invitation without resistance, acknowledging that a few days by the water might help clear his mind. When Manny arrived 4 days later, Eduardo was shocked by his appearance. The boxer-turned-senator looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a palpable weariness in his movements. The burden of public service, it seemed, weighed more heavily than championship belts ever had. Eduardo personally escorted him to the resort's most private cottage, situated on a secluded stretch of beach. He assured Manny that the staff knew to give him space and emphasized the doctor's orders. No phones, no papers, no problems for 3 days. Manny responded with a weak smile, noting the similarity between Eduardo's protective attitude and Jinky's. Eduardo acknowledged the wisdom of Manny's wife, adding that both of them cared deeply about his well-being. For the first day, Manny mostly slept, catching up on rest that had eluded him for months. On the second day, Eduardo found him sitting on the beach at dawn, watching the sunrise with a tranquility that had been absent upon his arrival. Eduardo joined him, and they sat in companionable silence for several minutes, listening to the gentle rhythm of the waves. Eventually, Manny shared reflections on the concept of purpose and the meaning of a significant life. He contrasted the simplicity of his boxing career goals, winning fights, supporting family, bringing national pride, with the complexities of political life, with its competing interests and seemingly insurmountable problems. He expressed uncertainty about whether his efforts were making any meaningful difference. Eduardo reassured him of his impact, citing the opportunities he had created and lives changed, including Eduardo's own. Manny responded that this awareness, that one changed life could affect many others, like ripples in water, sustained him through challenges. He picked up a small shell from the sand, reminiscing about his mother collecting similar shells during his childhood, and her belief that divine messages could be found in the smallest things for those attentive enough to notice. As the sun rose higher, their conversation deepened. Manny shared his childhood dreams, concerns for the Philippines' future, and hopes for his children. Eduardo offered his own reflections on their parallel journeys and the leadership lessons gained through managing the resort. Manny observed that they had come full circle from their first meeting, Eduardo desperately seeking employment, now sitting together as friends and equals. This concept of equality resonated with Eduardo, who had always felt an invisible boundary between them despite Manny's generosity. Now, that boundary seemed completely dissolved. Eduardo recalled Manny's first-day statement that they weren't so different, both coming from nothing. He admitted his initial skepticism of this claim, given Manny's growing fame compared to his own desperate circumstances. Yet time had proven Manny correct. They were indeed similar people attempting to create something meaningful with their allotted time. By the third day, Manny's transformation was remarkable. Color had returned to his face, and the tension he had carried in his shoulders had noticeably decreased. More significantly, his eyes reflected internal renewal beyond mere physical rest. That evening, after a simple dinner of locally caught fish prepared by the resort's chef, Manny requested a beach walk with Eduardo. During this stroll under moonlight, he revealed a proposition he had been considering for some time: the creation of a foundation focused on providing entrepreneurial opportunities for former household workers and service industry employees. This foundation would offer not just funding but mentorship, business education, and ongoing support. The model would replicate their experience with Eduardo and the resort, not charity but investment in potential, teaching self-sufficiency rather than creating dependency. Manny then stunned Eduardo by announcing his desire for Eduardo to lead this foundation. Eduardo was overwhelmed by the proposition, uncertain of his qualifications despite his success with the resort. Manny countered that Eduardo's lived experience made him uniquely qualified, having intimately understood both service to others and independent business development. His story embodied the foundation's purpose, proof of what was possible with the right opportunity. Eduardo requested time to consider this significant offer, needing to consult his family and consider implications for the resort. Manny readily agreed, assuring him there was no rush for a decision. As they continued walking, Eduardo experienced a curious sensation, as though his entire life had been unconsciously preparing him for this moment. His years serving the Pacquiao household, the challenges of building the resort, even the values instilled by his parents seemed to converge in this unexpected opportunity. When Manny departed the following morning, refreshed and reinvigorated, an unspoken understanding existed between them. Their relationship had evolved yet again into a partnership transcending their shared history. Over subsequent weeks, Eduardo carefully deliberated. He consulted family members, spoke with trusted advisors, and spent long hours in reflection. The decision wasn't easy. The resort represented his personal achievement and pride. Yet the foundation's potential impact ultimately proved too compelling to decline. 2 months later, at a press conference in Manila, Manny Pacquiao announced the establishment of the Full Circle Foundation, dedicated to empowering service industry workers through entrepreneurship. Standing beside him was Eduardo Santos, introduced not as his former employee, but as the foundation's executive director. The media predictably focused on this unusual partnership, the boxing legend and his former household helper now jointly leading a multi-million peso foundation. Some outlets characterized it merely as another example of Pacquiao's charitable giving, missing the deeper significance that both men understood. This wasn't charity. It was recognition of human potential. It was belief in the power of opportunity. Most importantly, it demonstrated that genuine relationships could transcend the boundaries of class and circumstance that so often divided Filipino society. When Eduardo approached the microphone for his first public address, momentarily intimidated by the assembled journalists and cameras, he felt Manny's reassuring hand on his shoulder and heard his whispered encouragement to speak authentically about his personal journey. Eduardo proceeded to share his story, from desperation to dignity, from service to leadership. He described the resort, the families it supported, and his pride in creating opportunities for others. He outlined his vision for the foundation not with polished executive rhetoric, but with the authentic voice of someone who had lived the very transformation the foundation sought to enable. His heartfelt presentation received enthusiastic applause. Journalists who had expected a routine charity announcement found themselves moved by the genuine emotion and purpose they had witnessed. Later, as they left the venue, Manny expressed satisfaction with Eduardo's performance, confirming that he had been the perfect choice for the role. Eduardo acknowledged this with a mixture of humility and newfound confidence, softly echoing Manny's earlier observation about their journey coming full circle. Neither man could have predicted that the most profound demonstration of their bond, and the true culmination of their 15-year journey, was still to come. A year passed, during which the Full Circle Foundation established itself as a unique presence in Philippine social entrepreneurship. Under Eduardo's leadership, the organization had already helped 20 former domestic workers launch small businesses ranging from catering services to tailoring cooperatives. The foundation's approach was distinctive. Each entrepreneur received not only seed funding but comprehensive support, including business training, mentorship from established business owners, and ongoing guidance. In public presentations, Eduardo frequently emphasized that their mission extended beyond business creation to ensuring sustainable success for new business owners. Meanwhile, Santos Beach Resort continued to thrive under the management team Eduardo had carefully assembled. He maintained weekly visits and an active advisory role while focusing primarily on the foundation's expanding demands. Manny's political career had also flourished, with increasing speculation about a potential presidential run in 2022. His legislative achievements had silenced many critics, and his popularity among ordinary Filipinos remained undiminished. On a warm October morning in 2020, Eduardo was reviewing applications for the foundation's second cohort of entrepreneurs when his assistant informed him that Manny needed to see him urgently. Concerned, Eduardo immediately cleared his schedule. When Manny arrived at the foundation's modest offices, Eduardo was struck by his solemn demeanor. This wasn't the energetic senator or the friendly former boss he knew so well. Eduardo inquired about Manny's well-being. Manny assured him that everything was fine, better than fine, but his expression remained grave. He explained that he had reached an important decision, and Eduardo would be the first person outside his immediate family to hear it. Eduardo listened with growing amazement as Manny revealed his plans. After months of prayer and reflection, he had decided not to pursue the presidency. Instead, he would complete his Senate term and then step back from politics entirely to focus on philanthropic work. Manny explained his belief that public service didn't necessarily require holding office. Sometimes more good could be accomplished outside formal systems than within them. This news alone was surprising, but what followed left Eduardo speechless. Manny announced the establishment of a trust that would fund the Full Circle Foundation in perpetuity, beginning with 100 million pesos and provisions for additional funding based on performance metrics he was confident Eduardo would exceed. Eduardo struggled to process the magnitude of this commitment. Such funding would allow the foundation to expand exponentially, potentially helping thousands of service workers transform their lives. He expressed profound gratitude for this extraordinary generosity. Manny dismissed this characterization, framing the decision as strategic investment rather than generosity. He cited Eduardo's first-year accomplishments as evidence he was simply investing in demonstrated success. There was more. Manny removed a legal document from his briefcase and placed it before Eduardo. He identified this as the final and perhaps most significant component of his plan. Eduardo examined the document with growing confusion, unable to decipher the legal terminology. It appeared to be some form of ownership transfer. When he admitted his lack of understanding, Manny explained simply that he was transferring majority ownership of Pacquiao Promotions to Eduardo. Eduardo was shocked. Pacquiao Promotions was one of Manny's most valuable business assets, a highly profitable boxing promotion company with international reach. He began to refuse, noting the company's substantial value, which Manny casually estimated at approximately 2 billion pesos. Eduardo pushed the document away, insisting this was excessive given the already generous foundation funding. Manny firmly returned the document, emphasizing that Eduardo had earned this not merely through 15 years of service, though that alone would justify it, but through his subsequent accomplishments in building a successful business, employing dozens, and now helping others achieve similar success through the foundation. Manny emphasized that he had observed Eduardo's evolution from opportunity seeker to opportunity creator, a transformation he valued above any monetary amount. Eduardo sat stunned, unable to formulate a response proportionate to the moment's significance. Manny continued more gently, revealing a personal motivation behind his decision. His children, now young adults pursuing their own interests, had shown little inclination toward managing his various business enterprises. While their financial futures were secure, Manny worried about his work's legacy beyond their material comfort. He expressed his desire for a completely trustworthy steward for these businesses, someone who understood their purpose transcended mere profit to encompass positive social impact, someone who would honor the values upon which they were built. Looking directly at Eduardo, Manny stated there was no one he trusted more for this responsibility. Their conversation continued for hours as Manny outlined his transition vision. Eduardo would gradually assume control over 2 years, existing management would remain in place, and a portion of profits would support the foundation's expansion. Throughout, Eduardo alternated between overwhelming gratitude and persistent disbelief. This wasn't simply a gift or opportunity, but a fundamental redirection of his life's trajectory and possibilities. When Eduardo finally found his voice, he asked for Manny's true motivation behind these extraordinary actions. After thoughtful silence, Manny responded with unusual vulnerability. He recalled his early promise to God that if blessed with success, he would use those blessings to help others. For years, he had interpreted this as financial giving, construction projects, and program creation, all worthwhile endeavors but ultimately insufficient. Gesturing toward Manila's skyline visible through the window, Manny reflected on the Philippines' systemic challenges: political dynasties, worker exploitation, self-serving leadership. He observed that meaningful change wouldn't come from simply replacing individuals within broken systems, but required entirely new models of business, leadership, and success. Manny explained that this transfer represented such a new model, demonstrating that someone could rise from domestic service to corporate leadership based on merit and character, proving that power could be transferred not through family connections or political ties, but through recognition of human potential. Eduardo then understood the full significance of Manny's proposition. This transcended his personal advancement or even the businesses involved. It challenged deeply entrenched social hierarchies that had limited opportunities for generations of Filipinos. Eduardo acknowledged the path wouldn't be easy, anticipating resistance, questions about his qualifications, and assumptions about their relationship. Manny welcomed these challenges with his characteristic fighter spirit, suggesting that skepticism would make Eduardo's successful leadership even more impactful. 3 weeks later came the formal announcement, generating shockwaves through Philippine business and political circles. As expected, reactions ranged from admiration to skepticism to outright cynicism. Some praised Pacquiao's vision in empowering someone who understood ordinary Filipinos' struggles. Others questioned Eduardo's qualifications despite his success with the resort and foundation. A few suggested improper motives, unable to comprehend such wealth transfer outside traditional channels. Throughout the media storm, Eduardo maintained dignified silence, focusing instead on learning everything possible about the businesses he would soon help lead. Manny responded to inquiries with characteristic directness, affirming his decision's finality and his absolute confidence in Eduardo. At the official signing ceremony, attended by business leaders, politicians, and media representatives, Manny surprised everyone with uncharacteristically brief remarks. After thanking key stakeholders and expressing confidence in the future, he yielded the microphone to Eduardo. Standing before the assembled dignitaries, Eduardo momentarily experienced the same intimidation he had felt at the foundation's launch. But as he surveyed the room, he saw his family, siblings who once depended on his meager wages, his mother who taught him honest work's value, nephews and nieces whose education he had funded. Drawing strength from their presence, he spoke not from prepared notes but from heart. He recalled his arrival at Manny's door 15 years earlier, offering nothing but willing hands and determination. Manny had provided not just employment but dignity, not merely opportunity but belief. Eduardo described Manny's current action as extraordinary while emphasizing the transformative principle it embodied: recognition that talent, dedication, and character exist throughout society, requiring only opportunity to flourish. As Eduardo outlined his vision for the businesses and foundation, the room's atmosphere noticeably shifted. Even skeptical observers sensed his authentic conviction, evident capabilities, and the genuine partnership that had developed between these men from such different backgrounds. Following the ceremony, Manny and Eduardo posed for photographs, their contrasting appearances as striking as at the resort opening years before. Yet something had changed. There now existed a power balance, a mutual respect transcending their origins. Amid camera flashes, Manny softly noted they had come full circle. Eduardo agreed but expanded the observation. This represented more than completion of a cycle. It marked the beginning of something entirely new. In subsequent years, their partnership indeed established new business leadership models in the Philippines. Eduardo's management approach, combining Manny's visionary thinking with his practical experience and worker empathy, generated not just profits but improved industry conditions. The foundation expanded exponentially, creating entrepreneurial pathways for hundreds, then thousands of service workers. Most significantly, their story inspired countless others, reminding a nation that true greatness lies not in titles or wealth, but in recognizing others' potential and helping fulfill it. For Manny Pacquiao, the boxing champion who had risen from cardboard boxes on Manila's streets to international fame and fortune, no ring victory could match the satisfaction of witnessing the transformation he had helped enable. For Eduardo Santos, the journey that began with desperate employment seeking had culminated in something far more valuable than material success: the opportunity to extend to others the same life-changing belief that had once been extended to him. What had begun as a simple employment relationship had evolved into something profound, testimony to the power of seeing beyond circumstances to the human potential residing within each person, awaiting only the chance to emerge. That was the true gift that changed everything.
Si te gustan este tipo de historias, déjanos tu like y suscríbete a nuestro canal para no perderte futuros videos.